Stairs look okay?
We're all connected.
Sing it together.
We are all connected.
Yeah.
By the air we breathe in, by the love we're feeling. We are all connected. By the air we breathe in, by the love we're feeling. the air we breathe in, by the love we're feeling. We are all connected by the air we breathe in, by the love we're feeling.
This is a beautiful Sanskrit chant, chanting the name of God. We're going to try to do it 108 times, right? 108 times.
Maybe not, but we'll do it just the right number of times to stir up the spiritual energy. Om Namo Narayanaya.
Narayanaya.
Please join us. Om Namo Narayanaya. 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 Om Namo Narayanaya.
Beautiful.
My name is Mike, and welcome to Unity of Walnut Creek. It's wonderful to have you here today with us. And I'd like to welcome all our online friends to this service. Your presence adds much to our community, and we appreciate you. Now I invite you to turn your cell phone to silence as we enjoy this sacred service together. Welcome once again to Narayan and Janet. Thank you for sharing your music with us this morning. Unity is a positive path for spiritual living. And our mission at Unity of Walnut Creek is in loving community. We empower spiritual growth by modeling and teaching universal spiritual principles. And I invite you to join me in affirming our statement of faith. There is only one presence and one power in the universe and in my life, the all-loving goodness of God. Now, if you're here for the first time today and are comfortable in doing so, we invite you to raise your hand so we may bring you a welcome packet and a wooden necklace which is handmade by one of our congregants. If you choose to wear the necklace today, our welcoming ambassadors will be able to identify you. There's also a connection card in your packet. If you take that to the bookstore, they will give you an additional welcome gift. If you'd rather, you may pick up the packet at the welcome table across the patio and still visit the bookstore for the gift. Connection cards are available for anyone in the seat pockets in front of you. With this card, you may submit a prayer request, and our prayer chaplains will pray with you throughout the week. You may also share feedback with us on these cards. If you request information, the staff will respond during office hours. The ushers will receive your card with the offering. Now it's time to greet the neighbors. So when you hear the gong, take a minute to greet the people immediately around you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Zoe, and I'm going to share some announcements with you guys. Our spiritual learning classes begin on September 11th. We have 3 great classes with 3 powerful instructors for 3 weeks in September. Kathleen Sims will teach us how to activate innate happiness and self-love. Carolyn Jansen will show us how to live life with more heart using heart math techniques. Jill Shin will help us go beyond believing that we are not good enough and remember the inherent goodness that we really are. Reverend Denise will return next Saturday to help transform our lives with the Q process. The Q process helps us shift how we see things and deeply understand that there is truly no one against us. Please register online today. Author Sunday is next week in our bookstore and will feature Alexandra de Avalon. Join us after the last service for a light lunch, conversation with the author, and special discounts. The Unity's men's group invites you to Tacos del Sol. Join us for an evening of all-you-can-eat tacos and dancing to music by DJ Old School. You won't want to miss this night of fun. And come to the patio today to find out how you can be part of the Summer of Love Unity's Fall fundraiser. And Reverend Christian has something to say.
Wow, would you believe it? There's more? There's a lot going on around here. So this week we are celebrating World Day of Prayer. Unity has been celebrating World Day of Prayer for many, many, many years. And so this Thursday is an opportunity for you to celebrate with us, holding the world in prayer. Seems like a good time, doesn't it? The theme is Peace in the Midst. And during that time, we'll come together and hear prayers from around the world, so various traditions of prayer, and they'll be marked by crystal bowls and silence. So it'll be a really beautiful way of holding our world together in prayer. It's at 7 o'clock this Thursday. If you want to come at noon for the prayer vigil and hold all the prayer list in prayer and just simply be in meditation, we invite you to that as well the same day on Thursday. And then I also want to tell you about our fall study groups, because that's pulling together now, and we've got several hosts and facilitators who have stepped in. And so if you want to participate in one of those groups, you can sign up to be a participant. If you're interested in being a host or a facilitator, there's still an opportunity to sign up for that. And all of that information is out on the table today. The book is The Hope, A Guide to Sacred Activism by Andrew Harvey. So you may want to pick up a copy of the book and follow along with us. It's a really powerful series about service and action. And a lot of us have been asking for that, ways to bring out our inner mystic into the world to offer service. And so this is going to be a wonderful series for us to dive deep into that topic together. So thank you. Sign up.
And make sure to take a good look at today's bulletin, which has information on all the things that I talked about. And also look at your email for the September issue of Centerpoint. And now for some more music.
You guys want to sing with us? Yeah. Oh, I love that about you.
This is Is. We're going to do a little Is. I'm sure you know it. Yeah?
Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, and the dreams that you dare to, dreams really do come true. Oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, birds fly over the rainbow. Why, oh why can't I? Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind me, oh, where troubles melt like lemon drops, way above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow. Bluebirds fly, and the dreams that you dare to, why, oh why can't I? So sweet. So sweet.
So we invite you to prepare for a time of meditation with this prayer that Ted Spayett is going to read for us. And then we'll have a little more music and some silence. So get comfortable, however that is for you, maybe removing things from your lap, perhaps closing your eyes and entering the sacred prayer time together.
Today's reading is the prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in the giving that we receive, and it is in the pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in the dying to the ego that we are born to eternal life. And so it is.
So we take that peace into our hearts, deep into our beings. I am an instrument of peace. Knowing this truth that wherever we go, fear or hatred is transformed into love. Darkness becomes light. Doubt becomes faith. Sorrows are transformed into joy. Because we ourselves are the embodiment of that divine, the instruments of the peace that passes all understanding. And so I invite you during our silent time to meditate upon this affirmation: I am an instrument of God's peace, in the silence. And from this place of peace, I move out into the world as the very animation of Spirit's peace, casting seeds of love and joy, peace and harmony and light wherever I go. Thank you, God, for reminding me that in the midst of anything, I am peace.
Lord Most High, our Heavenly Father, all our lives we dedicate to Thee. All our labors, all our joys and woes, all our pleasure, all our melody. Make us each a channel of Thy peace. When in darkness, guide us from above. Where there's hatred, may we sow Thy love. Where there's sorrow, may we sow Thy joy.
Amen.
The lyrics from this next song we got from Yogananda.
It's about how close the divine is all the time.
Alone I roam by the ocean shore, wrestling waves in a brawling roar, thy angry mood in a rippling quiver, till thy vastness made me shiver. Then a kindly spreading sentinel tree waved friendly arms to comfort me, consoling me with a look divine. Your tender leaves a swaying rhyme, and I knew that you were always near, and I knew that you were always near. Saw the gazeless mystic sky, and childlike I sought to pry, as if to play hide and seek with me, receding when I reached for thee. Slipped my boon in deep despair, you silent eluder everywhere, and I knew that you were always near, and I knew that you were always near. whispers from the friendly tree, vastness from the light blue sky, valley low and mountain high. Suddenly an unseen hand snatched away the blinding band. Now laughing sea, no more howling roar, gay glad world mystically open door, with only mists of dreams between. Someone beside me stood unseen. I knew that you were always here. Knew that you were always here. And I knew that you were always near. And I knew that you were always here.
So nice to have you both back. Thank you for being with us. Beautiful song. Yes? It's a small but mighty group of you today, isn't it? So years ago, on the old Silk Road, all kinds of interesting things happened. Trade, but more than trade. From east to west, that Silk Road gathered people together that wouldn't have otherwise ever met. So not only were they exchanging goods from different parts of the world, they were exchanging cultures, they were exchanging religious ideas, they were exchanging ways of life. Maybe one of those early times when different civilizations were truly intermixing with one another and ideally in our minds celebrating inclusivity and oneness, although I'm not sure that it was always exactly that way. Still today we're working on that one, right? But there were a couple of folks who came from the East. One pair in particular were Rumi and Shams. Some of you may be familiar with Rumi the poet, probably many of you are, the Sufi poet. And his soulmate, essentially, his beloved spiritual companion, sharer of this spiritual walk, was this gentleman named Shams. And Rumi was just heartbroken when Shams was sort of driven away by Rumi's students who were jealous, basically, that he was spending so much time with Shams on retreat and learning and poetry and sharing their spiritual walk together. And so Shams had left, and Rumi was really distraught, and so he sent his son and said, "Can you go find Shams? I really miss him, and I want him to come back." And so Rumi's son and an entourage went, and they found him in a tavern in Damascus. And he was playing cards there with a gentleman from the West, and the young man from the West was cheating. And when he saw this entourage, the way that they were treating Shams as if he was some revered spiritual teacher, the young man who was cheating got kind of uncomfortable, and so he confessed that he'd been cheating. And Shams said, "Oh, it's okay. Take your winnings to our friends in the West and bless them with the abundance." And that young man who was cheating was St. Francis of Assisi. Later became St. Francis of Assisi. We don't think of him as a cheater, do we? He was a soldier. He was a rowdy young hooligan. And he had a transformation. And these are the kinds of folks that, make us love them all the more, aren't they? Because they're human, and they give us hope that we too, in our ways where we make mistakes, can always be transformed, can always be awakened. St. Francis was awakened after he was a prisoner of war. He actually got very ill. He was still a very young man, and he had a spiritual awakening. And after that spiritual awakening, when he returned home, he was really renouncing the way that he had grown up and the materialism of his father, who was an Italian clothing merchant. And so he had given some of the money that a customer gave away to a beggar, and his father was just livid. And so there was constantly these fights going on between them. Of course, it was assumed he would take over the business, but that was not going to happen. And so it got so bad between them that there was a public hearing, and a public hearing between them to sort things out. And St. Francis just decided he was done with it, and he stripped all of his clothing off and walked out into the wilderness and became a monk and started an order. So it was a very dramatic kind of beginning of this Franciscan order. And there was early time when he had returned home that he was sitting in a small church in the countryside that was kind of falling into disrepair. Nobody went there. It was just kind of like a clay hovel, and from what I understand of the description. And there was a crucifix on the wall. And Francis began to pray and to behold Jesus. And it started this really deep relationship for him with Jesus. Jesus spoke to him and said, "Rebuild my church." And so Francis took it literally, and he actually rebuilt that little church. But later, his whole life showed us how he understood that message in a different way. Jesus didn't come really to build a physical church. And Francis understood the very essence of his teachings, which is really what unity is about, is following the teachings of Jesus, not so much the Orthodox Christian church idea. We happen to have a church building because we want to gather together. But it's really about following the teachings of the masters, and we were founded on the teachings of following the teachings of Jesus. And so Francis really emulated what he understood as those teachings. And so the Franciscan way at its core, even though, again, the Orthodox Church changes things, right? But the core of that mystical path is about service and humility and inclusivity and equality. And that's what Francis was all about. So this week, as we're getting ready to celebrate World Day of Prayer and to pray together and to emulate this theme that has been named for us, peace in the midst, I thought, who better to show us the way than someone like St. Francis, who in the midst, in his early days of some chaos, found peace through his own spiritual awakening, through health challenges and challenges with his father and challenges with ways of life and all the ways that things bumped up against each other. Out of that seeming chaos came this person who really embodies peace. And so sometimes I like to look at mystics or sages' lives to just see how can we be inspired by what they did or influenced in positive ways by what they did, even as far back as the 13th century and beyond. It's still very relevant, right? We're still human divine beings trying to make our way on this planet. And we're still all wanting to be that essence of peace or joy or love in the midst of everything that's going on, which today we don't have to look very far, do we? It's from one thing to the next, isn't it? Whether it's, not being able to get along and this otherizing and violence that occurs, or it's these natural disasters that we're dealing with and looking at the care of the planet and the care of each other. So many reasons for us to be alive on this planet now, walking this path as spiritual beings. And maybe a little bit of St. Francis influence will help us in this walk. Thomas Solano was one of his earliest biographers, and he talks about how Francis, and you probably know this from the popular movie, that he called all life basically brother and sister. So there was, of course, brother sun and sister moon. You're probably familiar with that. Or brother body and sister death. Or sister water and brother fire. So while we're thinking about, and when we get exposed in the news to the wildfires or the flooding and the hurricanes, we can think, oh, here comes sister water. Oh, there goes brother fire. And it softens it in a way. It shifts it in a way, doesn't it? It allows us to accept nature as it is on its own terms, and not necessarily accept all the consequences of what happens, of course, to take action, to meet things where we can, but it does soften things a little bit so we're not in a fight with the things that are happening in the world so much. But we're willing partners in the dance of life. So Francis really embodied that with all life. He showed kinship with all things. Even insects were brothers and sisters. So how would that change things if you stopped thinking of your pets as children and started thinking of them as brother or sister? Or you started thinking of the insects that come into your home as brother or sister? Would you treat them differently? Francis used to remove worms from the road to be sure that none of them got run over, because they were that precious. And Solano, this biographer, also talks about how he had such a tenderness with plants and every living thing, including inanimate things, like chairs and rugs and tables and things that came from the earth. So there was a real sense of the aliveness in everything, a real caring for things, while he also was detached from things and possessions. So how we walk that, where we have a real honoring for the things we have, but a willingness to simplify our lives so we're not about possessions and attachment to those possessions. So finding that sort of mystic, monk or nun-like way of life in everyday life for us. Simplifying may be one of those ways, simplifying, decluttering, letting go of things, and then not, getting all this new stuff, but sort of de-stuffing, And as we de-stuff, we free our energy. When we have less to take care of and worry about, we free ourselves for more of our spiritual practice and more of our service and connection to one another. Of course, that's what the whole life of renunciation was all about. This idea of living in poverty and vows of poverty was not to make poverty noble. It's actually a prosperity practice to free energy so that we don't have the bogged down responsibility of taking care of so much stuff. And instead, we focus on taking care of one another. So for us in the West, that's a great teaching. When Sham said, take the winnings to our friends in the West, it's sort of that we've become this really abundant place where we're thought of in the West as, very, very abundant, and we have so much comparatively to places around the world in terms of things and wealth and money. And none of those things are bad. They're wonderful to celebrate, and we can use them in very wise ways. And we can decide for ourselves how much is enough for me, and how can I then share the abundance with the rest of the world, whether it's things, resources, love, connection, the things that really last for people, right? Education, those kinds of gifts. There's stories about his, love and connection with all animals. As you know, he's the patron saint of nature, or the patron saint of animals. And he got that reputation because of the way that he was with wildlife. And one story, St. Francis was walking along with his brothers, and there were those probably starlings, the blackbirds that fly in synchronicity. And so they were all gathered. I like to think of them when they're in conference, because they're all in the trees and they're so loud, right? It seems like they've had this, they all decided we're going to meet at those 2 trees tonight at 5 o'clock and have a conference. Little starling name tags and all. And and Francis just stopped along the way, and he said, oh, wait, brothers, I need to go talk to the sister birds. And so he enters into this space where all the birds are, and the brothers tell the story of where he gave this sermon. He talked to the birds. I don't know all of what he said to the birds, but the story is that none of them flew away. They all got very quiet. So you know how loud they can get. They all got very quiet, and they listened and stayed put. So there was a real sense of that gentleness, that kind of gentleness that animals are so sensitive to that energy. And he had that kind of gentleness that he shared and extended. And there are ways that we could consider, how could I be more gentle with the life all around me? Maybe you'll be inspired to go give a sermon to the sister birds. Who knows what it may be for you? Or to listen to the rocks and let them give you a sermon, as John Muir would encourage us. And in another story of wildlife and kinship and inclusivity with all things, he is in this town of Cubio in Italy. And in that town, there was an issue. He lived there for a short time. And in that town, there was an issue with a wolf. The wolf would come into town and it would, feed on people's livestock and their chickens and sometimes even attack people or children. And so it was becoming such a problem. And of course, the people in the town wanted to go out and hunt down that wolf. It sounds like a really familiar story, doesn't it? It happens all the time in this country, in places like Montana and Idaho and other places. A misunderstanding, in a way, of the nature of the wolf. And so Francis knew that the wolf could be ferocious when it needed its food, and the wolf could be kind and gentle and social. It was a loving being. It was a creature of God. And so it was with that kind of energy that he volunteered to go out into the mountains and find the wolf. And he did find the wolf. And when he found the wolf, the story goes that the jaws of the wolf closed, and the wolf came very gently over to St. Francis and laid at his feet. And he had a little conversation with the wolf. And he said, "Look, you can't go on like this. Your life's not going to last if you keep this up. The people in the town are very upset. And so I understand you need food. So I'd like you to make a pact with the townspeople, and I'd like you to follow me into town now." So the wolf comes into town with him, and the townspeople very, trepidatiously come out of their homes and come a little closer. They trust Francis, so they want to know what's going on, very curious too. And so he makes this pact between the wolf and the people, a contract. The people will feed the wolf, and the wolf will leave them and their animals alone. And he also makes a pact between the dogs in the town and the wolf, and he tells the dogs, you can't be ganging up on this wolf anymore. You fed your food, he gets fed his food, we're all going to live in peace. And that's the story of taming the wolf in Cubio. So the story, of course, is applicable to everything, isn't it? That we understand where something is coming from, why behavior, even of human beings, seems so fierce and ferocious. What is the food that is needed? Or what is the need? And how can we then negotiate the needs? And we all know how to do this. Some of you are even skilled in nonviolent communication or compassionate communication, and you're very literate in the needs and the feelings. And so we can talk in that way to each other and try to understand what is the need here that is not being met, and how can we work together to bridge those needs so that there isn't so much otherizing and demonizing. So it's from wildlife to each other. Francis was very much about inclusivity and equality. He treated St. Clare as his equal, and she was a great friend of his, and you could maybe say a soulmate of his as well. And she started the order, the Franciscan order for the nuns. And so they worked together very closely and very equally in many ways. Because Francis had started first, in some ways he was like a teacher, but he didn't see that relationship as a power over or an authority kind of relationship, but more as equals. For that time, that was pretty ahead of his time. So, sorry, I've got a lot of papers up here, so let me just figure out where I am. Francis often cited Peter, 1 Peter chapter 2, as he worked with lepers and beggars and others who he also saw as equals, which was, brand new for people of that era. I mean, of course, Jesus was one of those that brought that same kind of energy, and so Francis was emulating that. And so he would go to meet with the people who were begging for food or the people who were ill with leprosy, and he greeted them with a love and a kind of equality and not a fear, not afraid to be in connection with these people. So this verse he loved says, we should not want to be in charge of others. We are to be servants, and we should be subject to every human creature for God's sake. So in other words, to be in humility and to be of service. that idea of being responsible in the sense of the word, if you break it apart, having an ability to respond to each other, to care for each other, certainly was a big part of who he was. He also was contradictory, as we all are. You know, in some ways, he would talk about the body as brother body, and he would teach the brothers in the monastery to care for their bodies and to feed their bodies well and rest their bodies well and pray and do all the things that the body would need to thrive, exercise and move. And yet he also was part of that tradition and time when the church and the monks and nuns practiced asceticism. So there was, you know, like wearing the horsehair underneath their clothing and these really things to make the body uncomfortable. Was also he would also do those practices, so that it doesn't feel like it really lines up, but at the same time he was a, you know, like all of us, he had some contradictions in his ways of being. So there was a time when he was actually ill, and he was really on his deathbed, and he was exhausted, and he had not been treating his body well. And one of his brothers came to him, and he said to his brother, I don't know what to do. You know, I'm so tired, and I do not feel well in any way. And his brother said, look, when you fail to reward the body that has served you, and you give it unkindness and injustice, if you don't care for it, it's an unkindness and injustice not to care for this body that has served you so well, in other words. And Francis got it, and he said, oh, rejoice, brother body, and forgive me. So we can also take that transformation on, right? In all these ways that we can always transform, and we can always recognize where maybe we haven't treated our body as a temple, as a brother, as he would call it. And to look again and to say, forgive me for pushing you too hard, or for not resting you, or not caring for you, not feeding you well, not drinking plenty of life-giving water, not doing all the things that we know to do. And we can turn it around with that simple rejoice in the body and forgive me, so we can move together in this way that's an honor. So humility was certainly another thing that was shown in many ways. And if you ask some of the Franciscans today about what is perceived by many as an environmental crisis, their response will be that humility is really the way to go. Humility comes from the word humus, which means of the earth. And so to be in humility is to recognize the oneness that we have with the earth, the connection between the body and the earth, and to treat it in that way. So all of these different stories and ways of being for Francis taught us several lessons and several things that we can move forward in, and to be this peace in the midst of our world. Things like inclusivity and a power with each other rather than a power over, and extending that out into all of life. Even Albert Einstein talked about the importance of that it's not just about how we treat our fellow human beings, but it's also all living things. And so next time you go to smash a bug in your house, you might think instead of catching and releasing and blessing that little being, because it's your sister spider or your brother beetle. And it has just as much of a right to live because it was created just like us. It has a purpose, it has a cycle, it has an ecosystem that it's a part of. So I bless the little mouse that seems to visit us every night and leave little signs that it's been across the countertop. And I found one of those great little traps that you put some really sweet little nugget of something in, and once the mouse comes into the little house, it will be released and blessed far from our house, or a little further from our house. But we don't have to get angry about it, We don't have to resist what is, because we live in companionship with all of life. And so for each other, too, if we accept each other in a deeper way, we'll be walking the path of Francis. You know, if we treat each other as we would treat the resources in the world, so we rejoice in the tree and we give thanks for the tree because it exists, not just because it gives us things, but because it exists. And the same with us in partnership and relationship with one another. If we celebrate each other's existence and not just the ways that somebody gives to us or provides for us or fulfills our needs, then we stop making others responsible for our good and our happiness. Our relationships become so much freer, so much more prosperous, so much more joyful. And that's truly the walk of St. Francis, how we are with one another, all beings, everybody out there, your brother and your sister, everybody. You know, the neo-Nazi is your brother or your sister. That's sometimes hard for us, isn't it? Yeah. But still they are. Still the truth remains. And so how can we build bridges? How can we understand needs? How can we usher in the ferocity of what shows up as the wolf side of us into a place of negotiation and peace and understanding? Maybe it's through prayer, maybe it's through conversation, maybe it's through silent blessings within us. Maybe it starts with how you treat the spider in your house. Whatever it is, it's the walk of St. Francis, and that's what we're on this week as we move toward World Day of Prayer. So let's close out one more time with this prayer of St. Francis. I am an instrument of God's peace. Where there is hatred or fear, I bring love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, I sow faith. Where there is error, I bring truth. Where there is darkness, I dispel the darkness into light. Where there is sorrow, joy. O divine master of my being, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying to the ego self that we are born to eternal life. And so it is. Let's speak this affirmation together. I am a clear and resounding instrument of divine peace. And so it is. I want to invite you to pray with a prayer chaplain today. We have spent a lovely weekend that's still in process of training and retreating with our prayer chaplains, and I can tell you you've got a mighty team of prayers available to you. So if you have a joy in your life today, a celebration of some kind, something that's heavy on your heart, whatever it may be, look for a prayer chaplain with a lavender stole, and they'd be happy to pray with you. And I'm not seeing anybody today, but I wonder, I hate to put you on the spot, Ted. Would you be willing to be available for people? Okay, Ted's not wearing a stole, but you know who he is, so come see Ted if you'd like prayer. And now is the time that we would like to celebrate our prosperity as well. This is a time that we are celebrating in the essence of St. Francis, the dispossession, the freeing of what we have to give. And so I invoke that freeness for all of us to give to Spirit's work through our community as you feel guided today. So let's say our blessing together as we hold our tithes and offerings together. Divine love, one with me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. I am joy-filled and grateful. So it is.
blame. 'Cause deep inside we're all the same. One heart, one mind. Don't get left behind. Love and joy to you. 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 Love and joy. Love and joy. The sun feels good upon our face. Brother sun, it's good to be the human race. Let's not let it go to waste. Thoughts of separateness erased. One heart, one mind. Don't get left behind. Peace and joy to you. 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 Peace and joy. Peace and joy. Love and joy. Love and joy. Peace and joy to you. 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 Peace and joy. Peace and joy. Love and joy. Love and joy. Trials give to rain. Sometimes I feel the pain. The sun feels good upon our face. On our face. It's good to be the human race. Peace and joy to you.
Beautiful blessing. Thank you. And blessings. More blessings. Let's bless our offertory together, knowing that this abundance goes forth to bless not only our own community, but the tithes that we send out into the world. So let's bless it together. We give thanks for the ever-increasing, unceasing flow of absolute good in our lives now. So it is. Let's bring our children in, marching to the light. Marching in the light.
We are marching in the light of God. 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 We are marching. We are marching. Oh, we are marching in the light of God. We are marching. We are marching. Oh, we are marching in the light of God.
That was pretty fun, huh? Do you mind if we take a microphone? Or, well, you can maybe come up to the microphone. Yeah, how about that one? You going to tell us about what you did today?
You want to share what you did, like sharing love to the world? We shared love and learned a little bit of St. Francis and his love for the animals and the love for the world.
Did you hear about St. Francis and the wolf today?
They just heard about
St. Francis in general. Yeah, he loved the animals. Do you love animals? All right. Let's join hands and share our prayer of protection.
You can sing in here together.
Oh, I think he needs the microphone. Thank you. Together, the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. And the light and the peace on earth right now. So let your light shine and have fun.
Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Hey, don't we do St. Francis prayer before your meditation and then after? Yeah. We didn't get to do it before. Okay. Oh, because I went right into the Yeah, you were on a roll.